everyone. Everyone in the audience, if you're there, please do say hi in the chat, and we will start in 1 minute. Let's wait for people to come into the lounge, to come from the lounge. I can see my colleagues here for the IO Foundation. Maybe could you send a message to the people who are still out there and then come into the session and we can start.
Hey, Mariam.
Hi, good morning, Len.
Hi.
I can see you backstage.
Yeah, so many technical issues with me with AirMeet. Anyway, good morning, everyone. I think people can still listen in even if they're at the launch that happened last time.
Okay. All right. So I can't see who's in the lounge, but I can see people who are in this session. So it would be good for them to come into the session itself so that we can see who's here.
Okay, I'll send messages in.
Okay. Thank you,
All
Len.
right.
Everyone, this is Len, Programs Manager at the Foundation. She's calling in from the Philippines. Welcome, everybody. All right, I think we can just start. Okay, let's start this. Oops. I'm so sorry. What's happening to my mouse? Where's my... Okay. All right. Good evening. Good evening. Sorry. Good morning, everyone. Glad to see you all on a Sunday morning. I know we could all be sleeping in, but we are so glad and very happy to be gathering here today for the very not typical forum, or at least a not typical tech forum. Okay, we are discussing tech, but not in the traditional sense where it's always about either the tech or the business. But we should be, we are here to talk about the other side of tech, the users, the humans who will be using all these technologies for our everyday needs. Just to be clear that we are not here to discourage the use of technology or even to demonize technology. Okay, I think, maybe based on our conversations with people, there's been a common misconception that when we talk about these things, if you're not talking, good things about us, that means you hate us, right? But that's not actually the case. The thing is that we don't hate tech. We love technology, but we just want to make sure that the technologies that we design and come up with actually work for the public interest and not against it. Just a little bit of introduction. In the IO Foundation, we are very honored and very humbled to have an all-star panel with us today. Dr. Sean Tan, a seasoned technologist who's been around long enough to see the tech sector evolve in Malaysia from the pre-internet era. I'm sure he would be talking about that later on. And not only that, he also holds a law degree. It's not every day you see a technologist having trained into something that is not technical or not of the sciences as well. We are also joined by Nabila Hussain, previously with Microsoft and now a tech policy fellow at the Social and Economic Research Initiative, a non-partisan think tank dedicated to the promotion of evidence-based policies that address issues of inequality. I am particularly excited to be talking to Nabila because when I found out about her and the work that she's doing and knowing how very few of us are in this space, I was very excited to have her. So thank you, Nabila. She read law at SOAS and then did a postgrad in IP and international information law at King's College. And last but not least, we have Edwin Go, whose academic background is in psychology, but he is now a researcher under the Safety Nets research pillar at the Center, a centrist think tank driven by research and advocacy of progressive and pragmatic ideas. And now, in the presence of such towering figures, I feel humbled and honored to be moderating this forum today. My name is Mariam Lee, Strategic Project Manager at the IO Foundation, an international digital rights organization operating in Estonia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, and also the national implementer of the BHR in Tech project, with the Global Network Initiative in Malaysia, of which project I am the project officer. Today, we are celebrating the 10th year anniversary of the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, as on a human rights issue that would define our generation, the millennials as they call us, the issue of digital rights protection in the cyberspace. The UNGPs themselves are broad, okay? They consist of 3 pillars: government duty to protect human rights, the business responsibility to protect human rights, to respect human rights, and the third is access to remedy. They made up of 31 principles altogether based on these 3 pillars. Now, the things that we will be talking about today may seem new, but really, actually, they're not. Social issues have always been around, but today we see that they are being amplified or exacerbated by technology, where technology, being the neutral party, can be used for either, to advance society or to actually discriminate against them. Today's technological capabilities have made it possible to substantially change the way that we make things, the way that we communicate, and the way that we work, and the way that we live. While the social issues that we'll be discussing are not new, the way that they manifest in our society today is different. So, with that in mind, I would like to ask the very first question to all of our speakers today. Why, in your area of work, where have you seen technology and social issues intersect, and are these intersections something that we should be concerned about? I'm starting this question, I'm starting with a broad question to kind of give us a context on why we are talking about tech going bad, and what are the kind of things that we should be looking into. Who are we missing in this conversation about technology? Take it away, the first person on my screen here, Edwin.
Hi, Mariam. Thank you for the questions, and good morning, everyone. So I guess for context, I think I'll just introduce a bit about my work. My work covers various labor issues and social protections, with a focus on gig workers such as e-hailing drivers and delivery riders. So with my current understanding, I do think there's an intersection between technological advancements and Malaysian workers. I mean, even before the COVID-19 pandemics, we are seeing, past studies by Khazanah Research Institute had estimated that over half of all jobs in Malaysia will be displaced by digitalizations and automations, with the bulk of these high-risk jobs being the low and semi-skilled occupations. I think non-graduates who typically perform these jobs are now in urgent need for reskilling opportunity. However, our reskilling studies last year found that a majority of the non-graduates struggle to navigate the existing skill development ecosystems, which is now extensive but fragmented. We found that almost 80% of our non-graduate participants expressed interest in reskilling, but a large majority of them never participated in any reskilling program before. One of the main reasons they told us is that they did not know how and where to access courses that are relevant to them. So now that COVID-19 accelerates these job automations and the digital transformations of work, I think these issues will only be exacerbated further. So that's one. The second thing that I think I personally observed during the pandemic is that we are seeing many furloughed, unemployed, and as well as those who couldn't engage or enjoy the privilege of working from home are starting to take up gig works, mainly the more labor-intensive gig work such as delivery and e-hailing, as a way to make ends meet. So given the rapid growth of the gig economies and the digital revolutions of work, I think we are now we are really in need to tackle some of these uncertainties and job risks associated with gig work, as well as making our reskilling programs more accessible for the most vulnerable segments, so that we will leave no one behind as we progress in this with the technologies.
Thank you, Edwin. I'm gonna pass the mic to Sean. I really want to hear what you've in your experience being a technologist. What have you seen, and and how has this impacted our society in ways that we may not even realize yet?
Hello everyone, good morning. First, I'd like to say thank you to the IO Foundation and Mariam for inviting me to speak today. Before I give you an answer, maybe a little bit of a background. You've been telling everybody that I am very old. I've been around for a very long time, right? But yeah, so a bit of a bio first.
Experience. You're very experienced.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, all right. So a little bit of a bio. I have been programming since the late 1980s, so I have been around quite a bit, and I am a registered chartered and as well as a professional engineer in both Malaysia and the UK. So my background is very, very technical, right? Like you said, I've been around for quite a bit since the late 80s, right? So I've seen the world, like, so quote unquote pre-internet kind of days until today. And I've not only seen it, I've also been involved in its development in various things, right? So the big thing that I see is that the main progress, the main change that I've seen is that, number one is that tech has become very pervasive. Like it's in every part of our lives. It's ubiquitous, right? And tech has gone from being a little toy to being quite literally able to kill us today if we are not careful, depending on what kind of technology you're talking about, right? For example, self-driving cars, if the code is not written properly, you can literally crash and people literally die, things like that. So for me, after seeing all this massive change across more than 3 decades, my main concern has always remained the same though. The concern, even in the 90s until now, the concern is still the same concern. That is the digital divide between the haves and have-nots. And Edwin has sort of alluded to this in his intro just now as well, where he mentioned about people who are not able to upskill because they don't know where to upskill and things like that, right? So yeah, so there's a worsening divide, and that's my main fear in that sense. Those who have it, the digital haves, they'll be fine, right? Those who don't have it, it just gets worse and worse for them. And the other concern that I have is also a little bit of okay, this may not sound right, but every social issue today seems to call out for another app, which I personally think is not quite right either. But that's a topic for later session. But yeah, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. We've heard from Edwin. We've heard from Sean. Now we go to Nabila. Same question to you. In your area of work, what are we missing? Where have you seen the tech conversation is missing?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mariam, for the opportunity and for having me here as well this morning. So building on what Sean and Edwin have shared, I think it's important that we acknowledge that COVID-19 has really shown us our interconnectedness far beyond the connectivity offered by any mobile phone or the internet or fiber optic cables. And the intersection of technology and society is really everywhere. I don't think it's something that we can see as separate anymore. The pandemic has really been also a pandemic of inequality, I think has been addressed, exposing all the cracks and the fissures in our society, the haves and the have-nots. And as the world turned virtual overnight, we turned to technology as a tool. But I think it's important that we realize that technology has not been a lifeline for everyone. And so 2 examples where we see the intersection of technology and society. One is in education, where children are no longer able to return to school and have physical classes. And so online education has provided some solution, but it has only been a real meaningful solution to those of us with connectivity, devices, digital skills. And so that's one. And the other is with micro, small, and medium enterprises, where we see that it is only those enterprises with a digital presence that have managed to weather the effects of the pandemic. And those that have been primarily offline have not managed to survive. So while we see that technology is widely available and apps continue to be created, we have many solutions, but I think we need to ask if these are accessible and affordable and reaching all our segments of society. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I would actually like for all of the speakers here to go deeper into the conversation around technology and society. We're talking about developments here that are unthinkable even 10 years ago, even within the last 10 years. We're talking AI and blockchain and all other fancy names that we are giving the technologies today. And in terms of like what do you call it, where exactly does society and technology intersect with regards to our own presence, right? Our relationship with our digital selves, our relationship to our data. Is this something being talked about? Is this something that we're thinking about? And by extension, is the country Malaysia, right? Malaysia itself, are we thinking about social protection around people? Are we talking about social divide or the digital divide? Because I mean, as even Sean mentioned the digital divide earlier, the divide is actually not technological. The divide is social, and the divide is economic, and the divide is political. But then technology comes in and then amplifies that. So what do you think of that? What this is a question to all the panelists. We can start again with Edwin, if you don't mind, Edwin.
So just so that I understand the questions correctly, you're asking whether are we thinking about the social divide caused or amplified by technologies?
Yeah. So essentially, okay. the way that we're thinking about tech is a tool. It's not about upgrading from an iPhone 6 to an iPhone 10.
Yeah.
It's about changing business operations, changing the way that businesses are even run based on data now. And this data is being collected and being processed and being distributed in ways that we don't even know. This black box, they call it, right? The whole relationship. So that's what the question was about. What exactly is our human relationship to technology? And how does that, are we thinking about it along those lines? Is the country thinking about it along those lines?
I think there is definitely some thought process that go into how to tackle some of the social divides created or amplified by the technologies. However, at least in the areas of my interest, i.e. the gig economy, I think the response today has been very much very reactive, and it's piecemeal, like what Sean mentioned earlier. Whenever there is an issues that come up or comes to their attentions, then only we start thinking about whether do we need a new laws or do we need a new occupation license to address a piecemeal issues that created by technology, rather than a more holistic approach of looking at what exactly has been changed by the technologies or what has not been changed by the technologies. And from there, we try to address or find out a solution that can address all these concerns, be it a labor concerns, a social concerns, or even a social protection concerns that has created, and maybe a more solutions from there, I think we need a solution that is more integrated approach, a solution that really covers the holistic aspects and not just one issues in particular. I think that would be, if going down the piecemeal regulation approach that we have today, I think we will continue to see our laws and regulations being less and less relevant, and we end up having need to update it very frequently or come up with new regulations after that.
Right. Yeah. When we say that we come up with new regulations, we seem to have a regulation draft for AI, and then we want to have a regulation for blockchain. We are regulating technology, which actually is a bit weird because technology changes all the time, and we don't even know if the technologies that we are using today are even going to be used in the next 10, 20 years. And we don't even know what are the kinds of technologies that would even come up, that would even appear in the future. So how are we regulating specific technology without addressing the underlying social issues? I just would like to share a quote that I saw on Public Interest Tech. Digitizing a broken process gets you a digitized broken process, because we need to understand that technology is the tool that digital transformation is not about the technology. Digital transformation is about transforming business processes using technology. The technology can come in whatever form, and I think that's what that Edwin was was highlighting earlier in terms of like regulating technology is not technology specific, but what drives the technology is the processes and the systems that we build in around the technology itself. Let's go to Sean to hear his thoughts on the question.
All right. So just picking up from what both you and Edwin sort of pointed out, Edwin did say that did point out that there's a very piecemeal approach now, and you're regulating very specific things, right? And exactly like what you pointed out, right? That we are regulating very specific technologies that may or may not even exist in 5 years, 10 years time or whatever. And also to address what you said earlier about trying to find the intersection point between our so-called physical and virtual worlds. Personally, if you ask me, I don't think that there's an intersection point anymore, in the sense that it's now one and the same, right? There's no way you can separate your real life from your digital life anymore. We are all basically inhabiting both things, right? So sometimes when I see like what Ivan pointed out, that people are trying to address specific regulatory issues like gig workers or whatever, and I just look at it and I tell myself and I tell myself that there really isn't any need for new regulation here, because the problem isn't new. Technology, as in platform, may be new, but the fundamental issues are new. Like for example, if it's gig workers, it's an exploitation of labor. Exploitation of labor has been around since labor has been around, right? So it's not anything new. I don't see why there's a need to new regulations. We can always fall back on the fundamental issues, and that's if you look at law, that's essentially what we do quite often, right? We fall back to the fundamental principles when there's shortage of any specific regulations for it, right? So to me, that's sort of like the way things are. I feel that things should change, lah. If you're asking about how does Malaysia as a country and think about the safety of the citizens and all that, I think that number one, as a country, we all understand that, and we all understand and appreciate that there are issues involved, especially in particular with safety. And I think this understanding is very, very clear to the generation that was born into it, i.e. the young ones, right? Where they from day one, they never had a world without the internet. So to them, in physical self and virtual self is self, right? There is no physical identity versus virtual identity. It is the same thing, because they were born that way, right? But even for old school corporates and institutions, I also think that there is an understanding generally that understanding that there needs to be concern and at least some measure of effort put into certain issues, like for example cybersecurity, ensuring our data is all well protected and things like that, right? However, that said, as we all know, there's very little action being taken, even for very well known like cybersecurity breaches and things like that. So therefore, I feel that as a whole, as a country, we may lack urgency in this. We understand that there is a potential issue, but we are just not quite, we're quite chill about it for now. Let's put it that.
Before we go to Nabila, could you elaborate a little bit on what are the potential issues?
There are many potential issues. I just pointed out one in relation to, let's say, your identity, right? Your physical and virtual identities, right? Cybersecurity and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, like more specifically, the harms that could occur to us if cybersecurity is not up to par.
I think for most people, we sort of we know that because our physical selves and our virtual selves can no longer be separated. So if there is a cybersecurity breach, for example, and you lose your personal data, it is a major thing because you are essentially losing your own personal identity. It's not just your virtual identity; it's actually your personal identity. And real world effects are real. You can lose. It's not just about money; you can literally lose your life as well.
Yep. Actually, we describe it here at the IO Foundation. If somebody takes a part of your data, it's like taking a part of you away. Activists face, police, the potential of police arrest all the time, and the first thing that the police will take away from you is your phone. It's literally like taking a part of you away from you, and there is no divide, there is no disembodiment anymore. Totally, it's that. We can't see it that way anymore. Nabila, let's hear your thoughts on this one.
Thanks, Mariam. So I do agree that there are elements that we can fall back on, but I'm not sure those elements are our existing laws and regulations because those were made for a different era, an analog era. And I do think that there are difficulties in force-fitting those analog laws and policies into our digital world. But what I do think we can fall back on is those enduring principles that do apply regardless of what the technologies are that come into existence. So fairness, reliability, safety, accountability, inclusion, all of those need to cut across regardless of what the technology is. So I do agree on that point. I think we have talked about this already, the fact that technology in itself is not inherently good or bad, but it's how we develop it and how we deploy it. And I think when we talk about data as well, I think there's always a fear and a hesitation. Again, depending on generation, some generations are more willing to give up data for a discount or for access to something compared to other generations. But I think, again, data in itself is not good or bad, but it's what that data set looks like. Is it enshrining biases? Because we also have to remember that data captures what has happened up until this point, but it does not have predictive ability until a certain algorithm gives it that. So again, it's not about just giving away our autonomy or decision making to a machine and leaving it to the machine to decide for us. So I think we need to decide as a society what we are okay with, how much autonomy we would like to give away, and really remember that it is a human-machine interaction. In some cases, we're seeing brain-computer interfaces, which I don't fully understand, but it really shows you that we're pushing boundaries. And policies really need to catch up because we talk about Industry 4.0, Industrial Revolution, Fourth Industrial Revolution, but I think from a policy perspective, we're maybe at 1.0 or 2.0 at best.
So technologically, we're there at 4.0, but policy-wise, we're not catching up. That's a reality that we need to confront. But the conversation is heating up. Thank you so much, everyone, for all your answers thus far. The third question is a little bit more specific. We would like to kind of zoom in into the specific area of gig economy or platform economy and also social protection in this particular model. So I would like to ask this third question to Edwin specifically, and then I would ask for comments from Sean and Nabila. Edwin, your work revolves around the social protection of workers in the platform economy. So the question is, what exactly are the issues here? Is it rider compensation? Is it the status of the labor or the workers, or is it the failure of the government, or is it something bigger than that? Is it an ideology of a system that prioritizes profit over people? I know there's a lot of big words there. Edwin, you can bear with me.
So no problems. I think I just need to quickly share my screen.
Yep. I have already stopped presenting. Oh, yep.
Hey.
We have some questions lined up, but we will get to them after Edwin's speech.
Okay. So, let me try to see. Are you guys seeing? All right, cool.
Yep.
So, before I answer that question, I would just like to walk you through a bit of history to understand how we get here first. I think since the arrival of gig platforms companies in the early 2010s, gig work has become an increasingly dominant labor market features in Malaysia. We are seeing more and more gig companies offering different types of gig works and digital works today. In that sense, that what I mean here is that gig work, as the term gig works, could mean more than just delivery riders and e-hailing riders. We are also using the same terminology for digital freelancers and many other types of different jobs. But however, the rapid growth of the gig economy has only comes to the policymakers' concerns in recent years, when it started to raise the labor and safety net concerns about gig workers, especially those working in full time. To understand how fast has our gig economy has growth, I think I try to provide a picture over here, where you could see that the numbers of gig platforms workers has risen significantly, especially in the last 5 years. Based on the data shared by a government agency, we know that the majority of gig workers are males aged below 30 years old, engaging in the more labor-intensive e-hailings and delivery gigs. But so, what exactly has changed in these jobs that already long existed even before the gig platform? Is that at least in my opinion, I think it didn't change as much as we think it is. To some extent, gig platforms has helped to facilitate the relationships between service providers and the workers with their ad features such as the customer ratings and the algorithmic management to make things more efficient. But at the same time, it is also taking away some of the workers' freedoms and control, i.e., for example, like how their ability to negotiate fee, to negotiate or wages when they are at work. That being said, I think that is also the very core elements that define this work has pretty much remained the same. I think Sean has touched a little bit on this earlier. Let me give you an example. So take e-hailing services. Before that, we often know of it as taxi services. The idea of taxi services has not been changed. I mean, even though we have e-hailing services today, but the core nature of the work is still involving transporting persons from one point to another. In terms of working hours, in order for them to make enough incomes that can enable them to live adequately, we found out that they still need to work almost a full-time hours, if not more. And the same goes to their relationship between the service provider and the customers. Though as a gig workers, they still need to actively manage their relationship with the customers when they are at work, especially now that customer ratings. The customer rating is now included in how the algorithms will assign jobs for them, or how that will also determine whether would they receive how much jobs will they have that has subsequently will impact their incomes. So, and to answer your questions earlier, I think there are two reasons why the plight of the gig platform workers has become a hot topic today. First is there is a growing numbers of full-time gig workers. At least one of my studies in 2019 found that 60% of the participants had working full-time on their gig works. Now that the pandemic pushes more and more people into joining the gig economy, I think this segment will only be bigger now than what I saw in 2019. The second reasons, or probably the more crucial one, is really the unclear employment status. Whether we call them independent contractor, self-employed, freelancers, or micro business partner, any of these employment terms simply does not reflect the actual levels of job autonomy and their dependence on the platforms, which oftentimes it will vary with many factors such as their working hours, their ability to negotiate wages or fares, their access to end customers, the platform algorithms, and more. So as a result of the unclear employment status, gig workers are only classified as informal workers who would not have the same levels of labor rights and social protection as full-time employment, if they are meeting the full-time working hours. And by and large, this is because of the Malaysian's labor laws very much hinges on formalizations, i.e., those who engage in the full-time and formal employment, the employees, what we call them, would have access to labor rights and social protections. And to be fair to that, I mean that is largely due to how our Employment Act is increasingly outdated with the technological advancements. Although there are some voluntary protection schemes out there for gig workers or other forms of informal workers, we observe. At least I saw that the take-up rate has been low for quite a long time, and I think some of the cited reasons are low workers' awareness and tedious application process. And I think that's it.
So the issue is not new. That's what the problems are not new. It's just happening on a different place, on a digital platform. Am I getting that right?
I think the one is we have always have this group of informal workers, even before we have all these technologies. Let's just be honest with that. And this group of informal workers, in the past, they already do not have the labor rights and social protection as full-time employees. That is also not new. What is new is that technology, or in this case, the digital gig platforms, has made it so easy for everyone to participate in the gig economy, to perform it, be it as a form of main incomes or income supplement. So that is it. I think in short, I would say that technologies or the digital platforms only amplifies the problems, because now we have more people doing these informal jobs with a bunch of risks and uncertainties, and they are doing it full time.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask a follow up question that would also be for Sean and Nabila. What exactly are we missing here? Back to the topic, essentially. Like, we know that these problems are not new. We know that these problems are amplified by technology. And as Nabila has mentioned, our technology has gone 4.0, but our social policy are still at 1.0 or 2.0. So how do we get there? How do we fix this? Maybe Sean, you could start first.
All right, way to throw such a big question at me. All right. First of all, I would like to say that I totally agree with what Edwin has said. Right, that fundamentally nothing has changed. The world is still the same. Right. Like if we pick on the topic of e-hailing or gig workers, it's basically exploitation of labor. Right, like I mentioned earlier, it's been around ever since we've had labor. Of course, I'm not familiar with the specific aspects of labor law, right, in Malaysia, but it's basically like you said, the only thing that has changed is just the scale, right? The scale where, oops, I see things on the screen. All right, basically it's just the scale, right? So it's gone from a smaller scale now because everybody can easily get on, so it's a bigger scale. So I don't really, if you ask me, is how are we going to fix this problem? So since the problem is not new, then we have to ask the question of why hasn't this problem been fixed in the past? Right. So I guess the only sane answer that I can think of to that is in the past nobody cared. Right. Maybe because the number of people are so small, so it doesn't really matter. Right. They are at the fringes of society, so to speak. Right. But now that there are more and more people in it, then maybe then the government will have to care, right, and actually and do something about it and protect the people, or rather balance the equation between the corporates and the citizens, so to speak.
Yeah,
I.e. the government plays a role.
Definitely, that's one way to do it. I mean, in the UNGP BHR, the very first pillar is about the state duty to protect human rights. Whether or not the human rights violation is happening in the analog world or in the digital world, they still have that duty to protect human rights. Nabila, let's go to you. What are your thoughts on this one?
So I think I'd like to pick up on what Edwin said in relation to our laws being outdated. So the Employment Act was actually 1955, and what it sets out is two categories: independent contractors and employees. But what we are seeing around the world is more and more cases on gig workers go to court. Most of these cases are focused on the status of these workers. Are they independent contractors or employees? Canada has actually introduced a category of dependent contractor, which is somewhere in between. And that's very much a multifactorial approach that considers various different different metrics that they look at, different considerations, different factors to come to a conclusion of whether this person is a dependent contractor. So I think that's one, that there is this gray area in between, and we need to address that. I think there is no clear answer, but I worry that as the gig work allows for a lowered barrier to entry and more of us are able to participate. I think the number that I have is, as of October 2020, we were at 4 million people. I'm sure that number is far more as more people enter into the gig economy. I worry that that flexibility becomes a euphemism for precarity, because these are people working full-time without full-time benefits. So I think I would agree with both Edwin and Sean in that it does come down to us caring and wanting to make a difference. We have seen jurisdictions where Supreme Courts have said that gig workers are employees and have to be treated as such. So I don't think it's something that's impossible.
Specifically for Malaysia, Nabila, how do we get there? What are what are your recommendations?
I don't think we're going to solve an issue of this size in a 2-hour webinar. But I think it requires commitment from the various different parties involved. I mean, you have private sector, you have the employees or the workers in this case, the driver partners as they are sometimes called. You have civil society and academia with different views. Um, I'm sure there's a solution, but it does require all of us to come together. And I know that sounds very idealistic, but at the end of the day, these are people's livelihoods. We have seen solutions in other jurisdictions, and I don't see why Malaysia couldn't take the lead for this region and show that it is possible.
On that last point, I really very much agree. I think the Malaysia really has a lot of potential to really lead the discourse on this one, particularly where we are drafting this national action plan for business and human rights, and where, I mean, on the one hand, we seem to be dragging our feet, but also at the same time, maybe because it's just a matter of we don't know what to do. We know these problems exist. And then there's this whole world called technology that we don't understand. And so that's one of the reasons why we want to host more forums and webinars like this, so that we can reach out to the people who are building the technology, to the people who are deploying this technology for us, for humans, to improve our lives. And this actually has a connection to what I'm about to ask Sean. I mean, Sean, if you think that question, the previous question was big, this is going to be an even bigger one for you in particular. You are a technologist with a law degree. Talk to us about what made you go, from a technical background to a social science background. What were your considerations? Why do you think technologists should also, should have that expanded perspective on social issues? Go ahead, Sean.
Right. Thank you for asking me such a personal question. Right. But all right. So let me just first preface by saying I am not unique. I'm definitely not unique. I am currently serving on the the preliminary investigation panel, which is part of the disciplinary board of the Institution of Engineering and Technology. All right, so this is basically a professional body, a professional institution based in the UK, and their members are essentially engineers and technologists. Right? They've been around for a long time, right? And on this disciplinary board, when I first joined it, I got the opportunity to meet a bunch of the other members. And the other members come from they are engineers as well. They're all engineers, all technically trained. But we've also had people who are QCs. Those are Queen Counsel. So they're like really senior lawyers in the UK. We've also got magistrates, and we even have military court judges who are also there. So first of all, let me preface by saying that engineer with a law degree is not that unique, so to speak. Right? There are plenty of people like that around. Right. So even in Malaysia, and that's in the UK, but even in Malaysia, also similar scenarios, I also have friends who have also chosen like the same path as I have, right? Where we engineering friends who have gone on to also take their law degrees as well. Now, to answer specifically your question of why I did that. So this is purely I did it purely out of self-interest in a sense. I was always I was one of the lucky ones in the sense that I have always known that I wanted to be an engineer, right, since I was young. So that is my number one. So I'm not one of those people who did engineering because my parents asked me to do engineering, or I followed my friends to do engineering. No, I actually wanted to do engineering. In actual fact, my parents didn't want me to be an engineer. right? But I did that because I my passion lies there, right? But that said, I also always had an interest in the law. So since young, and my mom always used to call me a lawyer buruk lah. It's a Malaysian term, right? Lawyer buruk. So because I like to argue, every little thing I like to argue, right? And I like to quote this and quote that, and just like how lawyers argue, right? Quoting, citing this, citing that, right? So in that sense, it's always been a part of it's always been part of my interest. So I decided one day that okay, since I have the time, so why don't I go and take a law degree? And it also would help me in a sense to protect myself, so that I know my rights and things like that, right? And while doing it, while I was going through that journey, when I first started, I had this misconception that most people share. That is, engineering and law are on opposite ends of the spectrum, right? However, as I was doing the degree, I came to realize that they're actually not on the opposite ends of the spectrum. They're actually on the same end of the spectrum because it's very, very similar. At the end of the day, both law as well as engineering is about problem solving. It's applied problem solving, right? The problems may be different in nature. Like engineering, we deal with technological or physical problems, right? Whereas law, we deal with human problems, right? But a lot of it applies the same set of skills, right? You have a bunch of rules. In the case of law, you have man-made laws, and then you try to find the optimal solution within the framework that you have, right, to solve that particular problem. In engineering, it's the same thing as well. We have a bunch of rules. The rules are whatever the mathematical laws or the physical laws, right? Those govern engineering and technology, and we find an optimal solution within that framework as well, within the boundaries of the laws, right? Laws of physics and laws of math and all that, right? So at the end of the day, it's actually very much the same thing. It applies a very, very similar skill set. The only difference that I found, the only bit that was different, was this bit that I call dry and wet. What is dry? Dry is engineering in the sense that we don't repeat yourself. In engineering and technology, we tend to be very terse and very, 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 very exact to the point. Whereas in law, it's always wet, right twice, right? So if you want to make a point, you've got to like bring in numerous citations and cases and stuff like that to strengthen your point. So that's the only difference I found. It's in the nature of the communication, whether it's dry or whether it's wet. That's all. But otherwise, the rest of the skill sets are basically the same. So hence, I would actually and I actually do this as well. I actually actively encourage others to consider doing it too. Although I know that it's quite a bit of a commitment because a degree is not something you can finish in one summer. That it's something that takes a lot of time. I actually encourage all engineers and technologists to go through it because there are a lot of things that you learn along the way. So what are some of the things that I learned, right? Number one, I think this is the most important bit. Before I learned law, the way that I thought and the way that I framed the problems were very different. So if I were to see some sort of problem in society, the only tool I had was engineering tools, right? So I would frame the problems as engineering problems essentially, and come up with a very efficient, concise engineering way of solving the issue. But now that I've gone through the whole process of and finished my learning the law, earning my law degree, I have a new framework now, an additional framework to look at problems now. So the way I see it is that the law is essentially the operating system of society. So that's the interface at which people interact with each other. That the law draws the line essentially, right? Draws the line between how different parties can interact with each other. So in that sense, it's like a operating system of society. So I've got a new framework now and an additional framework to the technological framework. So whenever I see any real world issue, real world problem, I am able to frame things differently and look at things differently. Which is the reason why sometimes I look at problems and I think to myself that, not every problem begs for a technological solution, because not everything needs to be solved by technology. Sometimes the simplest solution to the problem is a non-technological one. It could just be as simple as just communicating better, or making things clearer, and that's it. And that could be as simple as that. You don't need a new app, to solve every single problem there is out there in the world. And less may be more, lah, so to speak, lah. So I would feel so that's to answer your question, lah. I think that most engineers and technologists, we should actually learn a lot. Even if we gain nothing else, we will gain a new perspective on how to frame human problems, and hopefully that will encourage us to come up with more holistic solutions rather than just a purely engineering or technologically efficient solution to the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. We actually have some questions from the floor, but I would like to ask Nabila and Edwin first if you would like to add anything to what Sean just shared. Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, to your point, thank you for sharing your journey with us. I think that's one of the things that we're also missing in this conversation, the career journey that technologists take, what that looks like, to encourage more people to make that investment, to study technology, and in your case, engineering and law. And I think that's what we're seeing is the future, a combination of computer science and social science. I think that also has to be reflected at the university level to ensure that we build that talent pipeline and talent ecosystem, so that when we talk about diversity in technology, there are options from a variety of groups, and to ensure that everybody is represented. Because I think one of the main issues that we see today is that while we talk about diversity and inclusion in tech, not all of us have the opportunity to study these different areas. So we don't have the right expertise, the right skill sets, and then there's only a certain type of individual from a certain socioeconomic strata that ends up in these roles. So I think in order for us to see more like Sean, we really need to start early on to ensure that the talent pipeline and the talent ecosystem is developed, so that we have talent from marginalized backgrounds, women, people with disabilities, and to ensure that the tech that we're developing is inclusive.
Thank you, Nabila. Edwin, would you like to add something?
I think I'd just like to emphasize on the importance of human-tech interactions. I think from the beginning until now, I think that has popped up to me as perhaps one of the more crucial elements that we are missing when developing new technologies, or where we try to try to solve our day-to-day problems with or without technologies. Like it or not, I think we are moving to an era where human tech interaction has become really important, not only for helping those with or without tech to understand and solve their day-to-day needs, but also for us to really understand how can we build tech in a way that is more human friendly. In this case, human friendly can cover both how it is ethically fair for everyone, and as well as how can it be more human friendly in the sense that it's easy accessible for everyone, especially the most vulnerable segments.
Thank you, Edwin. We are now at the 1 hour mark of the forum. I really did not feel that time has really passed, because I feel like in the past 1 hour we have crammed so much into the discussion, and we've highlighted the need in in the last one on how technologists and social workers need to come and work together, and that's literally what TechUp is for. This forum right now is being hosted on a TechUp a weekend, which is a monthly capacity building session for technologists and civil society to come together and kind of find a way to work together, because right now, we're not communicating, and so we're creating that alternative educational pipeline as we've discussed before, even in the smallest of ways. Definitely something really important to become part of the syllabus that technologists go through, and also social science students or graduates are also looking at technology and how this is fundamentally changing the way that we live and the way that we communicate with each other, and pointing out certain things that ought to be pointed out, especially vulnerable communities who would be the first to be impacted by the adverse effects of technology. We can go to Q&A now. We've had quite a few lined up, and the first one was actually on elections, but I would like to kind of maybe group that together with other social issues and start with a fundamental question from Len, actually, based on something that we've discussed before. Why is it that we cannot separate our digital and physical selves? I think this is a question for Sean. Go ahead, Sean.
Hi, Len. Thanks for the question. I think this is only a confusion for older people like us who actually, grew up in a world where, internet was not necessarily part of our lives, right? But if you were to ask the young ones, like my son today, my son is like three and a half. He grew up with, gadgets and internet, and it's part of his life. Like, for example, he first started to learn how to speak by talking to Google, because we have Google. My entire house is wired up with Google smart devices. So he'll tell Google to turn on the TV. He'll tell Google to play his favorite Paw Patrol. To him, Google is part of our life. It's not a separate thing, right? So in that sense, that's what I'm alluding to, in the sense that the younger generation that grew up with internet being part of their lives, and their expectation is that the internet will always be there and technology is always there. They're surrounded by technology completely. Then it's really difficult to draw a line between what's online and what's offline, right? So that is the way I see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, there's another question from Jean that is related to the first question earlier. If we consider our data as an extension to us, essentially our data is us, to which extent do you think, this is, again, I think this is a question for Sean, but I would like to also hear comments from Nabila and Edwin. To which extent do you think constitutional law already provides the protections that could be enabled? Because the laws are already there, some protections are already there. Maybe they are just not being transposed into the digital world, or is it something else entirely?
Okay, so this is again a question for me. I have to first again point out that I am not a lawyer. I cannot give legal advice. All right, so if you need legal advice, consult a lawyer. All right, I'm an engineer. So that's the disclaimer. But this, if you're asking me for my personal opinion, right? Which parts of the Constitution, for example, can be used to sort of can be extended sort of to the digital space and to help us with our digital data. If we are just looking at Malaysian constitutional law, ignoring the fact that there are a lot of issues with the concept of what is a right in Malaysian constitution, because we don't really have quote unquote explicitly stated rights in our constitution. But ignoring that fact, let's assume that there are some fundamental liberties that we enjoy. I would say that number one, we would definitely need to look at Article 5, which is our right to life. That is because if our digital data, right, our digital selves, it's compromised. For example, if our data is lost, leaked, or breached, or whatever, right? It can literally affect our lives. Like I said, you can literally get killed. You quite literally can get killed. But even if you don't get killed, right, you may lose your money. You may lose your livelihood if, let's say, somebody did a smear campaign on you or whatever, and faked your Twitter posts, and you got into trouble, stuff like that. Of course, our politicians always claim that their accounts are hacked, right? But honestly, how often do people's accounts get hacked, right? But yeah, so that's one of the points that I would one of the starting points at which I would think we can approach the issue. For example, from Article 5, the basis which is a right to life. And from there, we build on from that. Life means extending to livelihood, and livelihood then is then affected by everything, including our digital identity and our digital data. Right? That's what I look at.
Thank you, Sean. I would like to go to Nabila as someone who's trained, someone who has had legal training. What are your thoughts on literally giving constitutional rights to data?
So, same as Sean, disclaimer, I went straight from law school into technology policy, and I am not in a position to be providing legal advice. And actually, as this question came up and as Sean was responding, I was actually thinking of it from a different angle. I mean, firstly, yes, the concept of rights is quite subjective and fluid and changes depending on who you ask. But I'm thinking about what happens when a case actually goes to court. Do we have judges who understand the concept of digital rights? Do we have lawyers who are able to argue? I think yes, increasingly, but I'm not so sure that's the case for our judiciary. So I think that's something that we need to look at, the capacity building within that, the mechanisms that are meant to protect us. How do we ensure that policymakers, that our judges are upskilled, reskilled, in the same way that as we're talking about skills as a building block in the post-pandemic world, I think it needs to cut across all the different components that make up the systems that should be ensuring that we are safe online. That's my view. Thank you.
Thank you. Edwin, would you like to add to that?
I think the disclaimer here is that I've not even entered a law school. So I guess in that sense that I would just less on the which extent the laws can provide protection to us, but more on the term data itself. I think the idea of data has become such a broad term to the point that not many people actually understand what that actually means. It can range from our personal data, like IC and so on, to our geolocation data, our internet cookies, and a lot more. So, as what Nabila mentioned earlier, I think there's simply a need for not only law practitioners or policymakers, or really there's a need for almost at a consumer level, that there's a need to improve our consumer awareness of what is data and what data rights do they essentially have, and how can they better protect themselves in now and moving forward.
Right. Basically, starting with the citizens themselves having an awareness of their rights and their data rights, and then pushing for the legislation to support it. So the next question is actually, I think it's for Edwin from Len. In Malaysia, what rights and benefits can informal workers in the gig platform claim? And actually, there's a follow-up question to that. Considering COVID-19 and the current political landscape in Malaysia, do you think that the gig workers can see the light of day? Can see hope? Is there hope? Is there hope for gig workers?
Okay, I'll answer the one first. What rights and benefits informal workers in the gig economy platforms claim. Today, as I mentioned earlier, that because they are classified as informal workers, at least based on my limited understandings of the labor law, their rights are protected as listed in whatever that is listed in the law between the workers and the platforms. Whether that is a fair contract between the workers and the platforms, whether the workers has the ability to negotiate the contract, I think some questions that we need to answer. In terms of welfare benefits, we have self-employment injury schemes, which works almost like an workplace and accidents insurance for gig workers, but we might need to take note that because of the unique natures of gig work, as that's not all gig workers are the same, so the level of protection or the adequateness of it might not be there. Therefore, I think another better version at the current version, so the more suitable benefits some of the gig workers have are really the benefits programs which provided by their own key platforms, because they know what their business model is, they know how they can protect their workers better from that sense. I think I've seen these in Food Pandas, where they provide really quite a good and delivery riders focused insurance for their workers. So in that sense, I think you can kind of tell that the level of rights and benefits are really limited in these landscapes. Oftentimes, it really boils down to whether the companies themselves have that are willing to go the extra miles to provide some form of protections for the workers, whereas there is simply no proper laws that actually argue for that. On your next questions, it's a tough one. So, is there still hope for gig workers or even informal workers? I definitely think so. At least I would like to be optimistic in this area, because while they are as much as I personally I think there are rooms for us to revise our current labor laws and protection schemes. There are, for examples, like in terms of protecting the gig workers, we could look into a more behavioral approach to improve the take-up rate of social protections, such as we can, for example, we can automatically enroll all the gig workers or informal workers into the available schemes. In terms of their other in terms of their labor rights, I think there are still room for improvement. There are there are some discussions, policy discussion that is happening around in the circles, trying to find ways to properly provide the labor rights that is owed to the gig workers. On that note, I think the only things that we need to be really careful about here is we really need to study the feasibility of the employment classifications that best captures the underlying power relationships in these new forms of works, quote unquote. Else there will be unintended consequences that we might cause for gig workers and other forms of informal workers. I hope I answer your questions.
I think Len will be able to reply in the chat if the answer was sufficient. But that's really it's an early conversation. When it comes to labor rights, it's not something new. It needs to be something that is willing done for both parties, because usually the workers and the companies, they are at heads, when it comes to what rights should be given and things like that. And being companies that are thinking about profits,
Hey,
sometimes
Mariam,
it might not. Yep.
I just thought of one point I would like to add.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
that is, I think when we are trying to come up with regulations that ask
Mm-hmm.
the technology companies to provide some
Social
form of
protect.
protections for their workers, we
Yeah.
also need to consider that what is really the most what is fair to the companies as well
Mm.
as what is fair to the workers. Because
Yep.
I'm saying this here is because like understanding the business models of multiple gig companies,
Mm.
I would honestly think that not every gig companies can afford to pay the same amount of protection as the full-time employees we have today. So
Mm.
it really needs to be something that is catered and tailored to the workers and the companies itself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a
Yeah, I read a few days ago, Food Panda is considering a social protection scheme for the riders, and I haven't really looked into much of it yet. But that could be one example of companies taking that step towards it. There is another question from Jean in the Q&A section, but because since we're already on this topic, I would like to address one question from Dr. Jasmine Begum in the chat. She asked, hold on, I need to scroll. She asked, do you think more companies can sign up to the UNGP for BHR, and how can we encourage companies to do so? I assume that companies here means tech companies specifically, and we've seen trends in recent years where Facebook and Twitter and Google have their own human rights team. Not here, not in this part of the world, but India, at least in the headquarter office or at the main office, where they set up a human rights team to address human rights issues that happen in the digital space. And these are the kinds of initiatives that are being led by tech companies themselves. For example, Facebook has the Facebook Oversight Board looking over issues like hate speech online and divisive uh, content, misinformation, disinformation that has the potential to cause social chaos. And these are, I mean, I'm not here to say that whether or not this is this is the best model or whatever, and they are definitely not doing it as a way to comply to UNGP BHR, but more towards like a social pressure, the social pressure that these tech companies are now being aware. They are now aware that they need to address these issues, and they set up a team for it, even though it's still small and it's still growing. And one thing definitely that we've seen from this trend is that tech companies want to take that leadership before other tech companies. There is like this internal competition on who would be taking on that leadership for the application of human rights to technology. And we've mentioned this a little bit before, where Malaysia on its own, Malaysia as a country, has that potential and has that opportunity to lead the discourse on this space, to even lead the systems and the processes and the policies that we could come up with, and to lead not just in the region, but literally to lead the subject globally. And so definitely we need more, more collaborations, more encouragement of tech companies. I mean, being technologists, I mean, the one thing that we don't like to do is to miss out, right? It's always about being the early adopters of adopting the technology as early as possible. And we should also do that for social policy. We shouldn't just only keep that for the technology hardware, like you said. It's not just the tech, or it's also the social policies that should come along with it. And I hope with that, Dr. Jasmine, we could extend that conversation outside of this webinar or this forum, and have a way, figure out a way for us to provide that leadership, not just for the region, but for the whole world, really. The next question, but before I go to the next question, maybe someone from the panel would like to add something or comment on what we've discussed so far. I would like to just give that opportunity if somebody have a fleeting thought. No? Okay. All right. So I think this question is from John, is for all of you. Given that currently there is not a system of personal liability for programmers, accountability measures essentially, what would be necessary to enable that? We can start with Sean. Oh, Nabila. Oh, wait, sorry. I couldn't see who opened the microphone first.
If Nabila wants to say to answer first.
All right, sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I was thinking that as technology becomes interlinked with different areas of social and economic importance, so whether it's education, our MSMEs, healthcare, water, sanitation, there's an increasing movement for coders and programmers to subscribe to a Hippocratic oath similar to that of doctors, so whereby they pledge to do no harm. And I think that's something that's becoming increasingly relevant, for the reason that decisions or actions that are taken on a device coded by an individual far removed from you and that device could have life and death implications. So I would think a Hippocratic oath for programmers and coders could be one way of achieving this.
I wonder what would we call it? Is it the programmer's oath? Anyway, Dr. Sean, go ahead.
All right. Just going along the similar lines of what Nabila has said, due to the fact that software and technology is pervasive and going and everywhere now, and there is an element of public safety and public good as well in a lot of the projects that we work on. So I would go a bit further and say that we need a Hippocratic oath or some sort of code of ethics. This code of ethics or Hippocratic oath has to have teeth. So the model that I would look at would be more along the lines of, again, this is nothing new. It's not in the first thing in the world, but looking at along the lines of like other professions, right? The closest, of course, being engineering, but you can look at other professions like law or medicine, where because again, due to public safety and public good, the practitioners themselves are personally held liable for the work product that they produce, right? So if so it's not just a code of ethics on a piece of paper that you sign on to, but it's something that has teeth, right? If you are found to have breached your code of ethics, for example, your license, you will basically lose your license to practice and lose your livelihood, right? So and that would have to be enforced somehow, whether it's regulatory or in Malaysia, it's actually enforced through law. So there's the Registration of Engineers Act, and there's a similar one for like doctors as well as lawyers. And then you have your bar council, you have your MMC medical council, you have the board of engineers. These are the organizations that will actually then have to basically license and regulate practitioners, i.e. You will not be able to write, you will not be legally allowed to write a single line of code that reaches a product that reaches the hands of for example, an end consumer, unless you are licensed to do so. And that will then, in that way, using a model that is already well known, that we can then sort of attach personal liability That's the same thing. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, we all have personal liability. I.e., if something goes wrong, it's not just the company that gets into trouble. The engineer himself also gets into trouble. Personal liability. Right. So that is what I think would possibly be needed. However, that said, I can already foresee that there's going to be a lot of pushback against this because the government in Malaysia had actually tried to do something like this in, I think, 2012, 2013, where they tried to push forward what was then called the Board of Computing Professionals. Right, basically modeled after the engineering board. They basically took the Engineers Act and they just copied, cut and pasted, and tweaked a few things here and there. Right, so that was generally the idea. The crucial selling point the positive selling point that they tried to sell it on was that if you are licensed, for example, that means that you can work anywhere in the world. Similarly, like engineers and doctors as well. If we're licensed here, our license is recognized, in other countries as well, and so we can easily move around and things like that. But the flip side, the negative side was that the industry saw it as more regulation from the government, i.e., because the act also covers the fact that if you want to, for example, get build a product for a certain what they call critical infrastructure. I.e., for example, power stations or hospitals or stuff like that, right? Yeah, you would have to be licensed by this board. So that bit got pushed back from the industry because at the moment, the industry, nobody's licensed, right? And they feel that there's going to be potential room for abuse, right? Where you would then basically have an elite group of so-called coders that were allowed to get all these big massive government contracts and stuff like that, and the second class coders who are unlicensed and fly by night, the quote unquote your lawyer bureau or your illegal doctors, stuff like that happening. So there was a lot of pushback from that. So I'm not sure how well it would be accepted by the industry. So I don't know how if or when it will even possibly happen.
As you were talking just now, Sean, there was a question is there something like a programmer's code of ethics right now? And then
wait.
Yep, that's not.
Wait. All right. I'm not personally aware of any formalized programmer's code of ethics, but even if you look at like the medical or you look at the legal or engineering professions or whatever, you essentially formalize your own code of ethics at the end of the day. It's not something that you pluck from somewhere. It's something that the existing engineers, right? Because it's going to be regulated by your own peers. So peers, you sit down together, you work out what's considered right, what's considered wrong, and then you just go from there.
And the implementation, that is not like it doesn't go out of that field, or does it only company specific?
It only regulates people who practitioners of the field. So if you are an engineer registered with the board, you are allowed to do certain things. And if you step out of line, then the board can then take action against you. Hence, there's a disciplinary board. Like what I mentioned, I'm actually part of the IT disciplinary board, right? So then there's a disciplinary board, and I've been part of the disciplinary board for the IT for like 4 or 5 years now. I've seen cases, all kinds of cases from all over the world. They've gone through my desk. We've got small issues. We've also got big criminal cases and stuff like that. So the moment you step out of line, then there's a process that you go through, and then you get determined whether or not you breach the rules of ethics, and then sanctions.
Yeah. What would be considered out of line?
All kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. At the risk of revealing, I cannot reveal too much details, right? Because these are like personal things. But it could be as simple as just the simplest thing. I've had cases where two engineers are arguing publicly.
Right. Okay.
It's as simple as that. And one accused the other of being unprofessional. Okay. Right? So there's a certain element of defamation. But of course, we don't deal with the issue of defamation. That is dealt with under the law. But we deal with the issue of ethics, i.e., you're not supposed to do things like that publicly on a public forum. Let's say in this particular case, it was trade journals, but it could be Facebook, Twitter. You get into a fight with somebody and you accuse your peer of being unprofessional, therefore got no business and things like that. It could be something as simple as that. But I've also dealt with cases where there were literally corruption, criminal case. Then I've also dealt with even simple things like falsifying your credentials. There are also plenty of people who do that, falsifying credentials. So all kinds of stuff lah, small, big, macam-macam lah.
Thank you, Sean. I think there's one more question for you. What failed at the Board of Computing Professionals attempt? Could it be that there isn't an established language on digital harms, and therefore programmers cannot relate and build a sense of responsibility?
Okay, if you ask me personally, I don't understand this concept of having an established language of digital harms, because again, I look at it as there is no separation between the digital world and the real world. So a harm is a harm. The only question is the nature of the harm, whether it's to the individual or whether it's to property or whether it's to something else, right? But a harm is still a harm. So I think every human being knows when there is harm. The question that the only part that's maybe a bit blur or a bit gray is the degree of how much harm is acceptable, quote unquote acceptable. And that may be where there may be need for certain regulations or certain ethical rules to govern that. But at the end of the day, it's also quite subjective. Even if you look at our engineers' code of conduct, for example, they do spell out certain broad categories. In Malaysia, they do spell out certain broad categories of harms that have been identified and then put into legislation. However, there's also a very generic catch-all, as in, just a very general whatever that is, unethical practice. And that is the part that's very subjective and very open-ended. So if anyone ever gets accused of anything like that, then it goes through the whole process of your peers evaluating, whether or not this is considered, common practice in the industry, or whether this is you stepping out of line and stuff like that. So that line is not black and white drawn in legislation. There is some gray as well.
Thank you, Sean. Before we go to the next question, we still have 27 minutes left to this discussion. See, this is why I don't do math. But anyone else would like to add to what we've just discussed?
Can I just add one more point to the earlier question, the last question that you asked me? So I was talking about the digital harm, which I don't think that is true. But there was the other part of the question, which was what failed at the Board of Computing Professionals.
What failed?
Why did it fail? Like I mentioned, it was because there was a lot of pushback from industry. Why is there a lot of pushback from industry? Because one group would sees it as a potential threat, where you, like I said, you will end up having so-called two tiers of programmers, where you have the approved programmers and the non-approved programmers, and then the approved programmers get all the like the preferential treatment. In that sense, you get government contracts, big contracts, and stuff like that, right? So there was that threat. Then there was also threat from if you're not talking about business, you're just talking about like the normal coders who are just going to be employed by either groups could employ them. There's also a potential threat that a lot of people saw as well, which was the licensing requirements, because the licensing requirements that they put into the so-called the bill was basically ripped off from, like I said, they basically took the Engineers Act and just like tweaked certain bits. So that there are a lot of practitioners in the industry who are currently working in the industry doing software programming who are not going to meet the requirements of their license. So these people would find themselves if, for example, the thing gets passed into law, then you literally find yourself unable to practice. Even if you had been doing this job for the last 10 years, 15 years or whatever, you would find yourself overnight being a fly-by-night doctor or fly-by-night, illegal practitioner. So there was pushback on that as well.
Thank you, Sean. I think in the last question that I'm gonna ask you guys, like all of you, after after we go through all the questions, we'll be like, what can we do? And what can we change? Right? But before we get to that, there's another question to all the speakers. In your experience, do you think programmers or people in tech are aware of the potential harms of technology in society? And rate from 1 to 5, with 5 as the most aware. Let's start with you, Edwin.
Okay. I think it's really. I think the questions of the awareness of potential harms of tech in the society. Really, first of all, it really depends on the size of the companies. From that, but just looking at the technology sectors as a whole, I think it could be somewhere between 3 and 4. At least in my personal engagements with some of the companies, their awareness of the risk associated with their business models, but oftentimes I think we need to give the benefit of doubts that not all company started not all company starters and ends up being a moral gatekeeper in the society. As in, for example, like Google, any of the social media companies would not have starters and thinking that they will end up having to manage the development of hate speech in the online space. So with that benefit of doubts, I think it's about how we can pull things together through a multi-stakeholder approach, like helping while getting the tech companies to understand about to improve their awareness and finding the solution together.
Thank you, Edwin. Nabila, we can go to Nabila now for the same question.
So I think in terms of rating, I suppose it would be similar to Edwin in that it would be around 3 or 4. But I do think that when we talk about programmers or people in the tech business, I think it also needs to be an approach where we dig a little deeper. Who exactly are we referring to? Are these enterprise companies? Are they social media companies? Are they platforms that allow people to make a living? Because they all have different priorities, different business models, different audiences, and therefore different possible harms. So on the awareness front, I think there is definitely an increased awareness. We see more and more companies as part of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. But awareness is only the first step. How do we mitigate those harms? How do we provide recourse in the event that there is harm? So awareness, yes, absolutely. But I think there is opportunity for more to be done.
Thank you, Nabila. Sean, what's your rate, 1 to 5?
All right. On this, I think I will differ from the other two speakers. I will actually rate the awareness at 5 stars. At 5, I am pretty sure that everyone is aware, right? Especially people who are working in the tech space, deploying technology, right? They are perfectly aware. And even in general, humans, right? We have an innate sense of fair play and justice. We know, we kind of know when something is not right, right? So awareness, I would say awareness definitely 5. But whether or not there's an ability to do something about it, that's a separate question, right? Because the companies may want certain things to be done, and it's basically orders coming down from the top. Now, if you are the coder at the bottom, you know that okay, this isn't right, but what can you do about it? Now, that's the part that's a bit of the issue, and that one I would have to agree with the rest of us, because that's probably at a 3 or a 4. On that bit, I have to also just say that if we have a form of regulation in the sense of licensing of programmers, then they can actually help programmers to push back against management decisions. I have personally been caught in this scenario where I was asked to do something that I felt was a bit, ethically questionable. It's not necessarily illegal as a crime, but it is potentially ethically questionable. And I literally pushed back against my boss, and the company was willing to give me a letter to indemnify me against any damages. And I told them straight up that yes, you may be able to indemnify me against civil liabilities. So if I get sued and I get damages that need to be paid, you can pay for me, fine. But you can't indemnify me against my personal liabilities. If I were to lose my license to practice, there's nothing you can do about it. The company can't do anything about it. So I pushed back and I told them that I was not going to do it, right? So in that sense, I think that again, this regulatory thing, right, getting registered as licensed as coders and all that, there's potential good and bad to it. There's potential good as well. Let's put it there.
Thank you, speakers. So we have another question that is related to basically what can we do and what has already been done, right? Currently, right now, we know that we need technologies and civil society to work together. And so the question here is, given that we direly need a more tech-savvy civil society, which option is more likely? Civil society getting more technical, or technologies getting involved in civil society? Let's go with Nabila for the first one, for this question. Sorry.
I like that your cat wants to be part of the conversation. So I think on this point, I think here we may need to consider the perceived and real power imbalance between users and technology companies. And while civil society will want to engage technology companies, we do also see an increase in technology companies wanting to engage end users, programmers, coders, civil society, academia, to ensure that decisions made are multi-stakeholder. I think we're also seeing a move for multi-stakeholder approaches to become sort of a new multilateral. So I think on this point, it will go both ways. Which is more likely? Personally, I think it's difficult to say, but I do think it comes back and to emphasize the point that skills will be the differentiator as we move forward, which is why also we need to ensure that skills development opportunities are portable and are not linked to employment status. There are a lot of upskilling opportunities that become available once you are an employee. But what about those of us who are freelancers, gig workers, in between, and would like to upskill or reskill? So I think we do need to have a dual track which looks at those who are in the workforce as a formal part of the workforce and those of us who are informal as well.
Thank you, Nabila. Edwin, what are your thoughts on this one?
I think while I agree with the two-pronged strategies that Nabila proposed, I would highlight that probably, at least to me, I think there is a bigger role on the technologies end. The reasons that I have here is largely because of the power relationship between technologies and consumers. It's like, I give you examples. It's like today, if we use an ATM machines, do we concern whether everyone knows how the ATM machines is built or manufactured? Not exactly, but what most consumers want to know is that how they can use it safely and in a way that their data is protected, their money is there. So building on that end, building on the power relation, the need to look at the power relationship between consumers and technologies, I would concur with Sean's point earlier is that maybe some forms of occupational licensing is required in order to ensure that the asymmetrical informations between consumers and technologies can be breached, as well as making sure that there is some form of code of ethics is follows amongst all the programmers and coders. That being said, I acknowledge that there is a concern about potential exploitations of this occupational license. I guess the way to mitigate that risk is to really move away from thinking that occupational licensing for each industry is almost the same, because it never is the same. They're never the same thing, basically. Like each of the industry will have its own unique natures. For example, I think as based on my understandings of programmers, I think there are a lot of programmers that we are seeing today who do not have paper qualifications, and they do amazing jobs. So if we want to move towards occupational licensing for that particular industry, we really need to accommodate for all these nuances that we are seeing in the market today. In addition, I think when we talk about the term technologies, I will also highlight the role of the companies themselves. Today, we are seeing many companies like holding their own algorithms, whether is it to match jobs for workers, or whether it's another forms of algorithms. Companies are taking this algorithm almost like the secret sauce of their companies. I think there's a need to break that myth. I think companies to some extent have some responsibility to inform or be more transparent in telling us about what is in the algorithms, or find ways to improve consumer awareness of how these algorithms are designed. In that sense, I think how we should go about it, I really don't have a clear ideas or solution for that yet. But I do think that is an area which we really need to have more conversations about. And that's it from me.
Thank you. You're suggesting to open up the black box. Are we sure we're ready for what we want to find? But yeah, I agree. We need more conversations on it. Definitely, not just about what it is, but like how they're being used, and what are the impact on society, and how can we still have that technology, but it's not being used it's not being abused. Sorry, that should be the right word. Sean, what about you? What are your thoughts on this question?
All right. Okay. So looking at it from maybe a slightly different perspective. Okay. Moving from if civil society members want to get more technical, it's certainly not impossible. But the question is also like to what degree of technicality you want to get, right? If it's a matter of appreciating the technology behind it and how it works, I certainly think that is perfectly doable. Even you don't even need to get a proper degree or in IT or whatever to know that, right? Just to give a very quick example, right? Like the judge who presided over the Oracle versus Google case in the US, he was a 70-year-old guy. He actually learned how to program in Java, right, in order for him to understand the intricacies of the case. But of course, people like him are rare, right? But and of course, I do not then expect him to be able to write a very high-end algorithm or whatever in Java. No, but at least he took the effort to learn it so that he understood the technical aspects of the case that he was dealing with, and which would help him to come to a better judgment. Because otherwise, it's just through analogies, and the analogies may not always be one-to-one. It's always a little bit different, right? So, in sense of the depth of understanding, I think getting a basic understanding is probably very doable. There are plenty of things online, plenty of resources nowadays to learn all these things. So it's perfectly doable. But trying to get a more detailed understanding, that may be a bit more difficult. That may require high-level math or whatever. And so that may be more out of reach for most people. So that said, I personally think that education plays a factor here. Like earlier, Nabila and were also alluding to this, that we've got to education can be a bit more holistic. So I used to be a lecturer as well at a university. We always have humanities electives. Let's just put it that way. Like whether you do engineering or you do computer science or whatever, there's always like electives that you can take, humanities, right? But the way that these humanities electives are treated is a different thing lah. It is there. It's part of the syllabus. You have to take like 3 or 4 modules on it, right? But those 3 or 4 modules are treated as like an afterthought. It's like we'll just sign up for whatever lah. Whichever one easy to get A lah. We don't really care about learning anything. Just care about getting through the requirements. That's all. So that bit I think needs to be changed. People need technologies, especially as engineers. We need to be shown from a very early point that the things that we are going to build are going to have a massive effect on society. And so we need to learn a little bit more about how society works and not just how the machine works, which tends to be the focus of the training. And so work out some and make it a point to get people to sign up for more significant electives, quote unquote. But that also then brings up the question of, does the university have the manpower to like run those courses and things like that, right? For example, I know that in some engineering programs in Malaysia, in certain universities, they actually have law. They have a law module that is taught to all engineers. But that would mean that you would require somebody in your faculty who has that. Either you have a law faculty next door, which you can borrow the lecturer from, or if you don't have one, then you need to have a faculty who's a trained lawyer or trained law degree or whatever, to actually teach that. So that brings the question of resources and all that, which I don't think we're going to get into. But yeah, so it needs to be more holistic.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And there are very little things that I disagree with the panel today, and we've discussed from the very beginning we are asking the question: what are the considerations that we are not taking into considerations when it comes to our discussions around tech? The tech forums and the tech discussions that we go to, are they pointing out these things? And are we even invited to be speakers, at those kind of spaces in order for us to also give our perspective on how technology is being designed, deployed, being the biggest stakeholder to this subject that we have right now. Basically, the humans, the users. The users should be the king. The users' first approach should be the underlying consideration in any tech from the very beginning. That's what we meant. That's what we mean when we say rights by design, privacy by design. You don't wait for somebody to become an expert in computer science in order for us to know that the technology that we're using is safe. We have 6 minutes to the forum, and I think this is a great time to ask the final question to the panelists. What do you see is the future of human rights and technology, or the intersections of technology and society? How do we navigate this? What are the trends? Where do you see this is going? What can we do in order to shape it? Let's start with Nabila.
Okay, so where do we begin? There's a lot that we've talked about, but I think in closing, what comes to mind is one of the quotes that I feel really summarizes where we are right now, which is the future is already here, but it is not equally distributed. And I think we will continue to see technology push boundaries. We will continue to see new cutting edge developments, leading developments. But what is really going to make the difference is the policies and our choices in how we invest, what we invest in as a society. That is really going to decide whether these technologies make or break us as a community, as a country. So it really comes back to policies, regulations, and conversations like today, which I think are so critical in shaping how we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Nabila. Are you asking for a second forum?
Well, I think if
No, that was
there is a need, then yeah, of course. And I mean, always happy to discuss further and dive deeper into the issues.
yeah, totally agree. It doesn't even have to be here specifically, but in terms of quantity of conversations like this, definitely needs to be increased. Agree with you there. Let's go to Edwin. What are your thoughts?
Excuse me, sorry, what was the question again?
What can we do? What are the trends? What are we doing to shape?
Okay, I think I'll start off with like what can we do in terms of more towards the workers end. I think at least currently I am looking into the promulgations of a Fair Work Act in Malaysia. Let us revisit the enduring principles that defines the relationship between workers and companies, and remove the clutters like the technologies in the interventions of the technology and all those things. We just let us look at the level of employers' control, the workers' dependence on the companies, and from there let us decide what is fair to the workers and what is fair to the companies. So that's on the workers' end. I think on a higher level, towards what should we do about the technology moving forward, I think we need. It's really about going back to the first principles, that to establish what is the agreements or the moral agreements that we have here. I think there are a lot of basic principles that we agreed long before technologies even came about, like do no harm and all those kind of things. I think if we can build from there, or we can enforce our understandings on or seed those understandings of these very basic moral principles in professionals, workers, and companies. I don't see that. I think there will be no need for us to keep on having or repeating the conversations or trying to keep on repeating that awareness is important. Yeah, I hope I answer your question, Maya.
Taking the next step that's to catch up, essentially, right? Human rights should be at 4.0 right now, or social policy should be at 4.0 right now. But I really love this analogy that was given by Nabila, that we're still not there yet. Technology is fastly going. We're going to go 5G very soon, and then we're going to have 6G, and then who knows what else we're going to get. And yet the social innovation and the social policy innovation is not in line with the technological innovation. With that, I would like to ask Sean, what are your thoughts on this question, and please your concluding remarks.
Like Nabila said, this question is extremely broad, right? But yeah, so I think I will just focus on the last bits that I talked about, which was on professional licensing of the profession. I think I actually foresee that coming. It's not something that is avoidable by the industry, because at some point we are going to have some form of regulation for coders and all that, because whatever we work on, has public safety aspect to it. So, and that with that in place, we can also have our engineers forcibly trained and forced to learn, certain, for example, like I said, human rights issues, so that and legal issues and ethic issues, so that they can actually understand what it means to be, what is just, what is equitable, and what is fair. Right? Because at the end of the day, it's a balance, right, between the corporate interests, the people's interests, and all that. So if we're talking about products, commercial products, so then the engineers can, for example, know that when they are trying to optimize an algorithm, what does it mean to optimize an algorithm? It does not necessarily mean maximizing corporate profits. They may have to work out what it means to be optimal. It may be optimal social good, for example, and then work out how best to go about doing that. It will be interesting. It opens up a whole different branch of technological innovation, and I think that's something that we can do, and it will probably be done at some point.
Thank you, Sean. We certainly hope so. I think a lot of the things that we've discussed today and our thinking process, our ethos pretty much align. We really are very grateful for all of your presence here, not just to the speakers, Nabila, Edwin, and Sean, but also to the people who are listening, who are in the audience and interacting in the chat and asking questions to the speakers, and basically just care about something like this at a point where it's it's in the early developments of the field, in the early discussions on how this can be done, and we would like to invite everybody here and anyone who is interested in such things to be part, to collaborate, to work together, to be brainstorming, to be coming up with crazy solutions that we may not even think about. Basically open up our minds and open up our paradigm, our thinking in terms of what is possible within the technology sector, not just for the industry, not just for the business, but for the people who are affected by our usage of digital technologies. With that, I thank everyone. I would like to thank the speakers again on behalf of the IO Foundation. You may follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, which is very ironic because we don't actually do social media, but we do have social media presence. So we post our things there, but we don't interact on those things. Where we interact and where we do most of our work is on GitHub. So anyone here who is interested in that can follow us on the IO Foundation's GitHub, and also follow our work on business and human rights in technology. With the project. Thank you so much for to Dr. Jasmine Begum in the chat for pointing out Microsoft's being a signatory to the UNGP and actually having some concrete actions in terms of implementing business and human rights in the technology space. Thank you so much, everybody, once again. Have a good day, and see you guys soon at the next TechUp in July. Thank you very much.